Hello, everyone. This is Baisakhi, and I am so excited to introduce you to the renowned neuropsychologist, Dr. Mario Martinez, who is going to be our guest for today's podcast. Dr. Martinez is a licensed clinical neuropsychologist, founder of Biocognitive Science, and best-selling author of The Mind-Body Code, which is about how to change the beliefs that limit your health, longevity, and success. The Mind-Body Self, which is about how longevity is culturally learned and the causes of health are inherited, as well as psychological novels like The Man from Autumn and coming soon, The Phoenix Self, which is science fiction with some scientific evidence on longevity and talks about how people can live up to 500 years. Well, you have to stay tuned for that book. So Dr. Martinez lectures worldwide on his theory of biocognition and on investigations he has conducted of alleged cases of stigmata from the Catholic Church, the BBC, Discovery, and National Geographic. Also, based on how the immune system makes decisions under conditions of uncertainty, he developed a unique model of organizational science that he calls the Empowerment Code to teach executives of global companies how to maximize productivity while enhancing wellness. That's amazing. So he has also done extensive research on Tibetan Buddhist monks, Catholic monks, and nuns, and discovered why so many of them get diabetes or prostate and ovarian cancer. His work reveals fascinating truths about the connection between mind and body in a cultural context. He is truly the bridge between science and consciousness, between body and mind, between genetics and epigenetics. Dr. Martinez specializes in how cultural and transcendental beliefs affect health and longevity. He is a world expert in this field of anti-aging and teaches centenarian consciousness. That is really interesting. So in today's discussion, we are going to primarily focus on how biological age can be reversed without medication, looking at epigenetic markers such as the environment and cultural beliefs affecting gene expression of health or illness. Quoting Dr. Martinez, what have the cultures of your life taught you about health and longevity? You may be surprised at what comes up as you develop your own awareness and better understand mind-body codes. So, without further ado, let's dive right into the topic at hand. But before that, we need to hear from him a little introduction about biocognition and what it is all about. So, Dr. Martinez, you are the founder of Biocognitive Science. I know you coined that term. Would you please tell us what exactly biocognition is and how do mind and body talk to each other?
Thank you for having me. That's the most beautiful introduction I've ever had. Very nice. Well, as you said, biocognition is a word that I had to invent. And what it means is that there's really very little doubt that mind and body communicate with each other, but nobody tells you how. And what I have done with biocognition is I bring mind and body together to communicate in a cultural context. And that is really the introduction and the offering that I have for science. And culture is really the collective beliefs about anything that's important in survival and in meaning. Aesthetics, ethics, wellness, a sense of longevity, all those things. But what's happened is that we have, as Homo sapiens, we've been around for 150,000 years. And we have only had our consciousness and our language maybe in the last 30, 40,000 years. So before, we had our senses. And we relied on our senses and we passed that on. Epigenetics means that you pass it on from what you learn from the environment to the next generation. I'll explain that in a bit. But you had, for example, very, very fine-tuned olfactories, and you could smell a lion 300 meters away. There was no language, and you had to rely on that for your survival. Language comes up and consciousness comes up, and now you can say, there's a lion 300 meters away. So the brain and the immune system had to adjust to paying attention to the language rather than to the senses. So the epigenetic loss that we had from the senses, we gained with language. So for example, if you say to somebody, you're so stupid, and they're shamed, their brain interprets that as some kind of pathogen out there, and you have inflammation, even though there's no pathogen, because it's a biosymbolic interpretation of your language. Knowing that, that's good news and bad news, because words can hurt you, but also words can heal you. So that's basically the idea. And then what I did is I studied centenarians, people who are over 100, to find out what is it that works. And at first I thought, as a neuropsychologist, I thought, well, it has to be genetics. It has to be, if you have good genetics, you live a long life. If you don't, you don't. Not that at all. Centenarians, genetics only accounts for 20 to 25%. The rest is the way they perceive the world and the way they interpret the world. And I found 4 factors that allows you to understand that. So with epigenetics, which I'll explain in a minute, we can actually reverse our biological age, and we can see what is causing us to express illnesses and to also express the causes of health. So that's basically, in very short terms, my work.
Wow, that's amazing. It's very interesting when you talk about these studies that you have done, because if you try to tell someone that, it's not your genes, but it's how you live that affects your health and your predisposition to diseases, they will think, you are crazy.
Yes.
But what you are teaching, I have experienced it in my life. So I can totally connect with your work, because you have the scientific evidence and the studies and the research to prove it. And I experienced it, I have traveled the whole world for the last 20 years. I was, hopping one country to another country. And throughout this time, I never went to a doctor, and I never felt the need that I would get sick, or I always believed that I will be healthy and I don't need any external help, and that kept me healthy. So what you're saying, how you perceive the world, how you perceive life, it affects a lot your health. I think there is a lot of truth in that.
Yes, and I think that the good news is that because if you want to just go a little bit over the science so you can see how it works, because people talk about mind and body communication, but they don't tell you how. Well,
exactly.
Let's just go to the most precise area. And I'm going to make it simple, because Einstein said, if you can't explain something in a simple way, you don't know what you're talking about. So I'm going to try to be very simple. Genes, the way that the genes are created, they are created in a way that it's replicating. It's exactly one gene with the other. Proteins, which is what we are created in a different way. Genes only respond to internal information, like a robot. Proteins are made to respond to the world. So your proteins, everything, your brain, everything is proteins. So your thoughts are made out that way. Your thoughts are made to respond to the world. Your cells, the intelligence is not in the nucleus. The intelligence in the membrane of the cells that interacts with the world. So a thought has horizons, and the horizons interact with the world. So to make it simple, what happens? If you believe that the world is dangerous, that's a belief system, then your brain will try to confirm that and will give you evidence that the world is terrible. It'll tell you, look, there was a rape in Calcutta and there was a fire in Brooklyn, and it confirms that. And it's called selective perception. But if you think that the world is good, you'll say, oh, there was Mother Teresa in Calcutta and there was this here. And what that does is that the person that sees the world as dangerous will be living in constant cortisol and stress hormones, and they're not going to live as long as a person who sees the world as something that is loving, that has an opportunity for you to interact. You secrete all the good chemicals like endorphins, serotonin, dopamine that enhance the immune system. So what happens is that the perception of the world will determine how long you're going to live and how healthy you're going to live, not genetics.
That is so true. That is like so true. I can't tell you how true that is, because most people ask me, they are like, how can you travel to all these places? Aren't you afraid? And I'm like, there is nothing to be afraid of. The world is a friendly place. So that's my perception of the world, that the world is a friendly place. So wherever I go, I make friends there. However, when someone thinks that the world is a dangerous place, then they will always meet people who will, rob them or kill them or, do things that will enhance that belief. So what you say is selective perception. Nowadays, in the new age terminology, I think a lot of people call it the law of attraction. And
yes, and there's no such thing as a law of attraction. Law of attraction is it's really junk science. What happens? The law of attraction doesn't exist. What exists is selective perception. Because if you sit at home for a month trying to attract something, you're not going to attract anything. But if you go out and let's say you have a Rolex watch, or you want to get a Rolex watch, you'll see it everywhere because your selective perception is looking for the Rolex. You're not attracting anything. You're just doing a selective perception of what's out there. If you don't want to buy a Rolex watch, it'll go through your blind spot. You won't see it.
Right.
That's how you explain it. Because unfortunately, the law of attraction was created by people who don't really know what they're saying. And some scientists have kind of bought into it. And it makes people feel disillusioned when it doesn't work. It doesn't work because it has nothing to do with attraction. But if you see the power that you have to create selective perception, and then to get whatever you want by the selectivity that you create, then you're empowered. And then you can have all kinds of neurological enhancements.
Yeah, I think they are still talking about a little bit about how the belief system works, because it says like fear attracts fear, love attracts love. So if you're afraid of something, you will attract a fearful experience. I think that's what they are trying to explain. And you are putting this scientific terminology and you are explaining it better, that it is more like a selective perception, and what is not in your consciousness, it will go through your blind spot.
Yes,
so
exactly.
That is the thing.
That's right.
So, I really, I watched some of your videos and your works. And when you say that the immune system is a confirmer of our consciousness and not a protector, I just loved the way you put that. There is really a huge difference between the two, a confirmer and a protector. And now more than ever, people need to learn about how the immune system is empowered or disempowered by their consciousness, especially during this pandemic crisis.
Especially pandemic, that's right.
Yeah, so if you would kindly elaborate a little bit on this, like how do people keep illnesses subconsciously, and how the immune system is a confirmer and not a protector? I think that will really help people to, understand this concept better.
Yes, I'm glad you brought that up. I wrote an article for medium.com on how the panic is the best friend of COVID.
Panic is the best friend of COVID. Okay, yeah. So when you panic, you attract more of
what happens when you panic, you're suppressing the immune system, which suppresses the IgAs and other antibodies. And the IgAs are the ones that fight upper respiratory viruses, including the COVID. So what happens is that if you have a perception that COVID is going to get you and it's going to kill you, you're going to create an alarm system that reduces your immune response to COVID, and you're going to be more prone to catching COVID. IgAs, and in fact, this is I think you'll find this very interesting because it had to do with Mother Teresa. IgAs protect against any kind of upper respiratory viruses, including COVID, which is upper respiratory. And the study was done, McClellan and other people have done it. And what they did is they showed people a video of Mother Teresa doing all of the compassionate things she does for 15 minutes. And they measured the IgAs before and after. Then they had another group where they showed them the Nazi army committing all the atrocities against the Jews, 15 minutes. Mm-hmm. And they measured pre-post. Mother Teresa, the IgAs went up the roof. The ones who were watching the Nazis went down. The ones who were watching the Nazis were more prone to catching a cold than the ones who were watching Mother Teresa. So that is an example of how the immune system responds to goodness rather than to darkness.
This is amazing. You know, like if you look at our entertainment industry, all the Hollywood movies, and, you know, they show so much violence and so much fear in those stories. So that really tells us, you know, look at the world, the shape it is in today. And we can attribute a lot of that on just the entertainment industry. Because, you know, we feed people with that negativity. Even the news, they are always giving you all the bad news, all the fearful news. And they are not giving you so much of the good news, that things are also going well. Things are not just going bad, but things are also going well. So when people watch the news, they think things are only going bad, you know, so they start having negative perception of the world, negative perception of people, and that automatically lower their immune system, their IgA levels and all that, right?
Very much, because you see, the brain doesn't know the difference. If you're watching a film where somebody's getting raped, the brain doesn't know. Cognition knows, but the brain responds to what it's looking at, and it creates, for example, there's studies that show that if the first thing you do, you go to your iPhone and watch media, your cortisol is going to be higher for the rest of the day. Cortisol is a stress hormone. If you don't do that and you do a meditation, your cortisol will be lower for the rest of the day. And what does the media do? The media is constantly bombarding you with information to create an alarm, to create a hyper alarm. And hyper alarm decreases immune function. And then what happens is you're more prone to catching anything that's going on out there.
Wow, that's so beautifully put. And what happens when you have the high levels of cortisol in your body in the long run?
Well, what happens is that, one, you can get cortisol fat, some fat around the stomach, because it turns a lot of what you eat into fat. But second, it suppresses your immune system. It suppresses the way that the immune system can fight, and it creates a hyper alarm that becomes like a catch-22. If the world is alarming, then let me look for alarms. Like, for example, in the work, you said that the work that I do with corporations, Fortune 100 corporations, I tell the executives that if you hire a manager who is a crisis intervention manager, within a few weeks, there's going to be a crisis every day, because they create that perception of a crisis. So,
and they are preparing for it, so they will experience it.
That's right. And they say, look what happened. That happened today and today. And they're creating that by the perception of the world that they have, because the brain will do something, whatever you repeat, the brain sees as a necessary thing for survival.
Right.
And whatever you repeat, cognition will say, this must be important, so let me validate it. So if you say, the world is very dangerous, the world is very dangerous, you repeat it, you create neuromaps that say the world, and then cognition will rationalize it and will say, yes, look what happened here, look what happened here, look what happened. And it validates the perception, what's called default mode. The default mode is the goggles that you use to look at the world.
Okay.
So you can change that. You can change that. What we do in biocognition is we don't care about changing behavior. We change the terrain that supports the behavior.
Right. And can you give a small example of that terrain which supports the behavior?
So, for example, the terrain of courage, for example, people say courage, the opposite is cowardness. No, the terrain that supports courage is valuation. Okay. So, for example, you're on a boat and there's possibly some sharks around, and your business card falls into the water. You're not going to jump in. Your child jumps in, your child falls, you jump right in because you're courageous? No, because you gave value to what was going on.
Okay.
So the terrain for courage is valuation. You don't build courage by getting rid of cowardness. You build courage by building valuation of self and whatever it is that you fight for. So that's one example. Another example, it would be when you gratitude is a powerful, powerful component. If you have gratitude, you're going to have emotional elegance. If someone gives you something, you can accept it without embarrassment or without, and unfortunately all cultures will teach you, oh, I love your hair. Oh, I haven't washed it in 3 days.
Right.
You're so bright. Oh no, it's just a gift. So what you're doing, you're not accepting gratitude, which is one of the opportunities to increase your oxytocin, which is a great neuropeptide that helps immune enhancement. So if you say, oh, my hair's just dirty, you're not allowing that to happen. And what you do is you allow the stress hormones to come in instead of the immune enhancers. And we do that all the time. So our cultures teach us, be great, achieve, and then when you achieve and other people tell you about it, deny it or minimize it. So it gives you a mixed message.
I always say this. I say modesty is not a virtue. Don't go for it, because a lot of times, we deserve that compliment. And when we get that compliment, we immediately reject it.
Yes.
And this is, of course, if we accept it, then we are afraid that people will perceive us as arrogant and conceited and haughty,
yes. But I'll tell you how centenarians
to pretend that we are modest.
It's a false modesty, false humility. What centenarians do is that people who are over 100, they don't do that. I talked to a 102-year-old woman, and she was beautiful. And I said, you are beautiful. She said, yes, thank you. I've always been beautiful ever since I was a little girl.
Wow.
You see?
That's amazing. In Costa Rica, I have my best friend. She's 87 years old. And, she probably has more energy than I do. And one day I saw a picture of her when she was younger. And I was like, oh, you were so beautiful. And she looked at me like a little cross. And she said, I am still beautiful. And I was like, yeah, of course, typical. You are still beautiful. But, in that moment, I was not talking about the present because I hadn't seen her younger days photo, and she's like, I'm still beautiful. So that, I think that self-image is what keeps her so vibrant and so beautiful at 87, and I don't know how many more years she will live, but she's like a great example.
That's centenarian consciousness. Another thing about centenarians is that they have what my mentor, George Solomon, who created psychoneuroimmunology, he called it healthy narcissism. It's inclusive narcissism. So I went to Cuba to do some research, and there was this 100-year-old man, and they gave him a party after I interviewed him, and there were women around, and he comes up to me and he says, have you noticed how the women are looking at me? They all love me.
That's amazing.
The next step was, he said, have you noticed how beautiful they are? Inclusive narcissism. They bring their narcissism into, a narcissist would say, look how beautiful they are, I'm going to manipulate them. The healthy would say, look how beautiful they are, and look how much they are in love with me. Inclusive. And that is one of the causes of health. The healthy narcissism is one of the causes of health.
Yeah, I think having a high perception about yourself, a really high image, because a lot of people fake confidence. A lot of people fake self-esteem, outside they look really confident and all that, and inside they are doing drugs and they are
They're falling apart.
Yeah, exactly. So I think we have a lot of that fakeness in our world, and because that authenticity is not there, and there is such a big difference between people's inner worlds and outer worlds, I think that's why we have so many problems in our world, right?
Yes.
And because people are having so many diseases.
You brought something very important. The immune system has morals. You have to
Right.
have coherence between the external world and the internal world. You present
Exactly.
yourself as a good person and you don't believe it, there's a biological incoherence there.
Right, right. If inside you don't believe what you are preaching or what you're saying, then of course there is a mismatch, misalignment, and that will affect you in the
Yes.
long run, right?
Sometimes when I do a workshop, somebody will say, "Oh, that was brilliant," and I'll say, "Thank you. Yeah, it was brilliant." And then they look at me and say, "You know why it was brilliant? Because only brilliant people can see brilliance." So it's a co-offering.
Wow. Lovely, lovely. So that, you have a very beautiful way to put things into perspective and use the right words so people can get the message. So I want to ask you something, another thing, which is I think here in the West, here in the East, this is a topic that many people will be really intrigued about. And I know that you have done an extensive research on Tibetan Buddhist monks as well as Catholic monks and nuns. And it is fascinating how our unresolved emotions can create illnesses. So, would you tell us briefly the reason why so many Buddhist monks get diabetes? And also, how can we cap the propensity for diabetes in natural ways?
Well, diabetes is a propensity that you have, genetic propensity, and also it has to do with what you eat. You eat sugar, 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 you're going to overwhelm your pancreas. But in addition to that, it has to do with, let's say you have a propensity to express diabetes. So in the Tibetan language, there's no word for emotions.
Right.
Cognition and emotions are one. The Dalai Lama had to come up with a word, because Dalai Lama is very interested in neuroscience. So the closest that he came to was a consciousness of affect. That's the closest he could come to. So when the Tibetan Buddhists do the what called the four immeasurables, the video that you watched, they do empathic joy, which is I send joy and congratulations to my enemies and to my loved and everything. Well, the Chinese government has raped nuns. They have burned the temples. So when they do the empathic joy and they say, I send my love to the Chinese, the immune system doesn't buy that. Whether
Right.
it's bad or not, the immune system says, no, you have to be angry at this first. And the righteous anger comes in. But since they don't consider mind and body as a separate thing in a way, then they consider that anger doesn't exist. The way that the system works is it says, if you don't allow anger to come in, the only way that I can deal with it is by suppressing it with an anesthetic. And the anesthetic is endorphins. Yeah. So they secrete a very large amount of endorphin and they don't feel the anger, but it's still there. Endorphins at a high level, at a chronic level, will affect the metabolic process of glucose, which then sets you up for diabetes. And one of the arguments is that, well, it's just because they changed their diets. They went to India, now they're changing their diets. They were in cold area, and now India. No, because the Tibetans that left Tibet, who are not lamas, do not have that propensity for diabetes because they can get angry. They have permission to get angry.
Oh, okay. So only the Tibetan Buddhist monks are getting diabetes, but let's say Indian Buddhist monks, they don't get so much diabetes. Is that what you're saying?
Well, the Tibetans who left Tibet, who are not lamas, who are allowed to express their anger, then they don't get it as much. And this is I'm oversimplifying because there's a lot more than that.
Right.
But in India, I think in India, they don't have that much of a problem with expressing your anger. It's a little bit better than the Tibetans. But one thing what you were talking about, the Catholic nuns and priests, the Catholic nuns and priests suppress any kind of sexuality.
Right.
So the suppression of sexuality can cause problems because when you suppress sexuality, you're suppressing the reproductive organs and the genitals. Well, the Tibetans can actually teach something there. The Tibetans have something good there. The Tibetans because they're also celibate. The Tibetan Lamas are celibate, so most of them. And what they do is a technique actually that I've worked with them, in that they do a meditation and they go to the genitals and they express every kind of sexuality that they feel. And
in
they
their mind.
In their mind. And they go to that
Okay.
part of the body, and they bring it up to the heart and they turn it into compassion.
Right, right.
The Catholic priests don't do that. They just suppress it.
Okay.
So it's a difference.
So yeah, so there is something like the Kundalini rising, you know,
Yeah,
and I think
yeah.
that's how they transmute the sexual
transmute.
energy to something creative and all that.
That's
so
right.
I think
It
that's
becomes
why they don't
compassion.
have it.
And the most beautiful sex is the tantric, bringing it up to a level of spirituality. If you leave
Right.
it at the primitive level and you suppress it, then my theory is that what's happening is you're not allowing enough information or bioinformation to go to those areas, and then you develop all kinds of problems. But if you allow it to come, you see, you can't control what you feel or what you think.
Exactly.
You can only control the way you respond to it.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah, you know, I think I always say that feelings are the language of your soul. So, you know, it's the first feeling, you know, it's something just even before you can verbalize it, you feel it. So you cannot change that, you know, you can work on that and, you know, you can use your thoughts to, you know, work on it. But that first feeling that comes from any experience, it is telling you something, you know,
Yes.
and you should heed to it. So when
Yes.
I think they reject it, and like you said, they don't feel the anger, they don't express the anger, and they directly go to empathic joy or loving kindness, I think that's why that the hormones are all imbalanced and endorphins are being secreted and they get diabetes.
Yes.
But
Because you can,
this is
No, go
this
ahead.
is really, really fascinating for people to know, because a lot of people follow these traditions blindly, you know, they
Yes.
don't question anything.
Yes, they don't have the
that's
science
the
behind it.
problem. Yeah.
And for example, if you want to do the foreign measurables, like that video that you talked about that I did on embodying the foreign measurables, you can do, for example, the empathic joy, and you can say, okay, I feel joy and I celebrate the wonderful things in my family. Easy. I feel joy and I can celebrate the achievements of people that I don't know. That's wonderful. But when you go to the enemy, you have to first express the anger before you do the empathic joy. And then it's good, because you don't want to carry anger and hatred, but you first
Right.
Immunologically in the evolutionary process of the 150,000 years of Homo sapiens, we learned that we have to express anger first before we can express our joy for the people that have hurt us.
Right, right. And what is a good way to express anger? Because I think out of all the emotions, anger is the most difficult emotion to control. And when you are angry, you can just flare up, you know,
Yes.
and it can hurt you. So what is a good way to express the anger and not get the side effects of that anger?
Well, the first thing is to look at it from the neurological, neuropsychological, the neuroscience. When you feel anger and you want to react, that's coming from the primitive brain, from the amygdala and parts of the brain. The first thing to do, take a deep breath so you can let the emotion go up to the cortex, which is a lot more refined and more elegant. So you have to give it time. So for example, you get an email that somebody upset you very much, and if you write right back, you're writing from the reptilian brain, and it's going to be crude. If you wait and you let it go to the cortex, then the more elegant emotions come in and you're able to handle things. So all you do is when anger comes in, you breathe and wait for it to go to the higher level of functioning. And then you respond from elegance. Now, elegance doesn't mean you take it. Elegance means you set limits, but you set limits with elegance. Anger, people think that to be angry, you have to be crude. You don't have to be crude. You can be very elegant with your anger. But you first have to wait for it to get from one side of the brain to the other.
Right. Yeah, I think setting that boundary, you know, sometimes people just step onto our boundaries and we feel angry. Yes. So you can create a boundary in an elegant way.
Yes, but you have to give it time for the brain to catch it.
Exactly, exactly. So that's great. Thank you for explaining that in such layman's terms. And I'm sure anybody who's watching this video will find that explanation very useful.
You can
Now,
practice.
I want, yeah, and I think with these topics, we did a warm up of today's main topic that we are going to talk about. So I know that your work is focused on longevity and anti aging in a cultural context. So I suppose we can create longevity in our thoughts, right? So I would you please explain to our audience how biological age can be reversed without medication?
Okay. First, we have chronological age.
Okay,
Chronological age, you can't do anything. Today, you're a day older than you were yesterday. That can't change.
correct.
Your body type can't change. The color of your hair can't change. The color of your eyes can't change unless you're a multiple personality. If you're a multiple personality, one personality will have diabetes with green eyes, and the other personality will have brown eyes with no diabetes. But that's
Really?
very rare, very, very rare. So for most people, the genetics can't change at that level. That's genetics. Epigenetics means that we have the ability for the environment to modify our gene expression, the external environment or the internal environment. It's called methylation of the chromosomes. It's very complex, but the point is that you can actually change it. So what that means is that if you can change it, then I thought, how do centenarians do it? So I study centenarians all over the world. And by the way, in Costa Rica is one of the blue zones. Costa Rica, they have a lot of centenarians.
Wow,
And
that's good to
there are
know.
several blue zones, yeah. So I studied the centenarians, and what I studied was the way that they look at the world. At first, I thought it's got to be genetics, their genes. I interviewed a Zen master who was 107 years old, and I
Wow.
asked him, how old were your parents when they died? Because I wanted a correlation. And of course, he gave me a same answer. My parents will die when I die. So I
Wow.
asked his assistant, I said, please, I got to find out because I'm doing anthropological work here. So she found out, she told me, father died at 75, mother died at 70. The other thing that they say is that telomeres, which are caps at the end of the chromosomes, they say, well, if you have long telomeres, you're going to live a long life. If you don't have long telomeres, you're not. Centenarians have long telomeres and short telomeres. The other thing
Oh,
about telomeres is that something called telomerase, which is an enzyme that allows the telomeres to grow. One of the things that allows it to grow is love. Love increases
okay.
that enzyme. So telomeres are not a good indicator of longevity.
All right.
Anti-inflammatories are better, like glycan and other anti-inflammatories are much better. So what do the centenarians do? They live in a world that allows the epigenetics of good genes to be expressed, and they cap the gene expression of illnesses. And what they do is they live in a world where they think they're going to live forever. They live in a world where they think that everybody loves them. They live in a world where they think that health is really an inheritance that you have, a right that you have. And they live in a world where the present is never too late to make decisions. If you begin to live that consciousness, you begin to trigger the epigenetics for longevity.
Wow. So it really depends on your consciousness, as you say, what you believe and what is programmed in your mind, or what programs you allow in your mind is what determines how long you will live.
Yes,
Because it's not necessary, because this guy, this Zen master, his parents died in their 70s, which is not that old,
no, of course.
comparatively, like people living up to 90 and 100, their 70 is just what? Just at 60 you retire and at 70 you die. So that's
Yes,
not a long life, especially in today's
yes,
world, right?
yes.
So
And what,
given that him living up to 107 years is really because of his belief system, right?
yes. And also, you never want to tell your age. When you tell your age, they put you into a cultural portal and you'll be treated into a culture portal, and you'll start acting that way. I'll give you an example. My colleague, Ellen Langer at Harvard, has done a lot of work in this area, like I have, in the context of how people age. So she had a group of, back in the 80s, she had a group of 80-year-old men, and she divided them into two groups. One, she told them, you have to come here as if you were 20 years younger. We want a name tag and a picture of you when you were 20 years younger, and you're going to live in a world, it's going to be like a time capsule. It's going to be I Love Lucy, and it's going to be Walter Cronkite and all the things back from the 60s and the 70s. The other group, she told them, you're going to live in this place, and you bring a tag with your name and your picture now, and you're going to talk about the good old days, how things were, and see how much you can remember. And she did biological markers and cognitive markers of aging, pre-post. On the fifth day, the people that were living as if they were back in those times had such remarkable changes that she brought in some independent raters. And what she did is she took the picture of day 1 and day 5, and she inverted it. And she asked these raters, what is the age difference in these people? They said from 8 to 10 years. The other people didn't change, and some of them got better. I mean, worse. They got worse because they were living something that no longer existed. What the Greeks called the prison of nostalgia, which will kill you. But then here's what happened. We talked about this quite a bit, Ellen and I, and now we have a better way of dealing with it. Within 6 months, they lost all the gains because they were put back into the grandfather portal. They would come back and they would say, I'm going to make my own coffee. No, grandfather, I'll make it for you. Within 6 months, they were back into the grandfather. When they came into the study, they came in like old men. When they left, they were playing touch football. But they lost that. So it's very important to understand that whatever you learn, you have to create subcultures of wellness to support it, so they don't put you back into the portal.
Okay, I think that is a very, very important thing, because it's true, we can learn something in a spiritual retreat center. We can go to a class, we can learn all these things. And then when we come back to our normal life, we are again immersed into that dysfunctional culture, the disempowering belief systems, the limited concepts of how you should be and all. And again, we fall back into that negative way of thinking, and then that starts affecting our lives again. So it is very important to sustain that thing, which you are learning. That's what you're saying, right?
Yes. In the course that I'm teaching, the 7-week course, we're going to have, after an hour and a half, we're going to have a breakout. So they break out into groups, and then they're going to learn how to maintain a subculture. So whatever they learn, they don't lose the therapeutic values. And that's what happens sometimes in therapy. You learn some things in therapy, or as you said, in a spiritual center, and it's wonderful, but then you go back and they don't teach you how to support the subculture of wellness.
Exactly.
And then you go back and you lose it, and you think you did something wrong. Cultures are very powerful.
Right.
Look what happened with India. India was controlled by the British for many, many, many years. They didn't lose their language. They didn't lose their religion. They didn't lose their rituals. Spain was controlled by the Arabs for 800 years. They didn't lose their religion. They didn't lose their the culture. It can work for the good, and it can work for the bad.
Correct. So if you have like an empowering culture where you are born into, then you will have automatically an empowered belief system. But if you come from a disempowering culture, then, like you were just mentioning India. So India is a very patriarchal country. And if you watch TV or the movies, you will see how the women are always in a disempowered state,
Yes.
Somehow they are being dominated, or, the mother-in-laws are always trying to subdue the wife of their sons, And although we have a lot of women emancipation and that kind of work going on, but still in pockets of the country, in rural areas, there is a lot of discrimination between women and men. Like they
Sure.
will send the boy to school, they won't send the girl to school if they don't
Yes.
have enough money and things like that.
Yes.
So naturally, women have that disempowered belief system, So how can people who come from such disempowering culture, how can they change their mindset and sustain it?
Well, it's very important because it would be simplistic to say, okay, start thinking of yourself as an independent person, but it's like asking somebody in a cocaine lab to give up cocaine. It's very difficult.
Correct.
So
Yeah.
what you have to do is you have to teach them that gradually they have to make the internal change without actually trying it out with that tribe, because the tribe's not going to accept it. They have to gradually
Yeah.
create the subcultures of wellness that allow them to then be empowered in other subcultures. You can never get redemption from your culture. You can never get redemption
Correct.
from your tribe, and you can never get confirmation because it's a collectivism. They want you to do collectivist things. When you individuate and you go on your own, they don't like it. And an example, when I go to many countries, especially in Asia, I'll tell people, look, I'm going to show you what culture is all about. And I'll ask them, how many people here are good fathers and good mothers and good sons and good daughters? Everybody raises their hand, collectivists. How many people here are honest? Everybody, collectivists. How many people here are brilliant? Not collectivists. Nobody raises their hand. Or they look around for
Wow.
permission. How many people are beautiful? Nobody raises their hand.
Incredible.
Because the culture will
Incredible.
say, this is what you can allow, and this is what you can't. Now, the Germans,
Right.
when you do it with the Germans, you can't stop them because they raise their hand for everything. They have a different culture.
Right, right. And that's why Germans are so empowered. In fact, I started traveling because I was inspired by the Germans in my university. I was learning German, and every vacation they would just pick up a map of an unknown country in Southeast Asia, and they will go alone exploring. And I come from a very conservative family, and I would watch them, and I'm like, wow, that's amazing. Like in India, they don't teach such things to their children, least of all to their girls. So when I would watch them, going trekking with a map and to an unknown country alone, and I'll be like, wow, that's fascinating.
Yes.
And then I started doing that, inspired by the Germans. So I think I created that subculture, what you are talking about, right?
Yes. Yes, but if you go back to your tribe, and we all have tribes, and you talk about that, you're the black sheep. They can't.
I always stand out.
You never discuss it. You let it go, and you live your own world.
And when I try to tell them the difficulty that I'm facing when I come back to this culture, then they take offense because I feel so much freer when I'm in Costa Rica. For I can wear anything and I can go out and nobody will say anything. They don't mind in your business. They don't poke their nose. But in India, it's like you are everybody's business.
That's right.
So
you have to pretend that you're complying, but internally you're not. Because if not, again, the cocaine lab, trying to get rid of cocaine, it doesn't work. But when you go back into another world, then it's okay. Then you can be yourself and you can be all those kinds of things. So I can't overemphasize, in order to bring it all together, I can't overemphasize the power of the culture, that it has much more than your genes, and it can heal you or kill you faster than your genes.
Correct. So one last question that I want to ask you. So you were talking about this subculture and sustaining that subculture. So my question is, how do you go about creating that subculture so you can sustain your empowered belief system in that? Because sometimes it happens to me also. Like when I'm in Costa Rica or in other country, I feel all empowered and everything. But the moment I come to India, my energy goes down. I start feeling depressed. I start putting on weight and I feel that there is no hope. And nobody has come and told me anything. I just start feeling it. And I feel like it's in the energy, it's in the environment here, so of course, I have my own techniques to come out of it eventually, but it takes me time. So I feel like I am a woman who is very empowered from within because I've traveled so much and I've seen so much of the world. So I can process these things faster. But someone who hasn't had the kind of experience that I have had, how can they create a subculture which is like totally opposite of their original culture and sustain that subculture so their empowered state of consciousness can continue?
Well, first, to be aware that this is happening, because our biology is very contextual. In one context, you're a little girl. In another context, you're an empowered woman. So it's very contextual. First, to be aware of that. And second, when you go back into that culture or when you're within that culture, you don't want to fight that culture. It's more powerful than you are. So what you do is you create people and find people that are compatible with you and let them confirm your individuality, let them confirm your strength, but you don't share that information with the other culture because they'll kill it immediately. So you have to have two worlds. The world, you want to honor that world, but you don't want to be enacted in that world. And what you do is you keep your subculture and you keep connections with people once you go into that culture to remind you that you're not that culture. You're only contextually enticed by that culture. And there are techniques in my books and things that I talk about, but that's basically the idea, to be aware that when you, I had a friend who was a very successful model, very wealthy, successful, wonderful, empowered. And one day we went to visit her mother in a small town in Tennessee. The moment she walked in, she was the helpless little girl. Mom, what can I do? Is there anything I can do? I said, why are you changing your voice? No, I'm not. She wasn't aware because she went into the contextual helplessness of the little girl.
Okay. Wow, that's amazing. I think that's where we hit the nail, because it's very true. Like when we are in the presence of certain people, we change ourselves.
Yes.
Because we want to be accepted in front of them.
Yes.
And then when we are in front of other people, we are behaving differently. And this is so true. We all do that. But you can do that when it is in an empowered state. But let's say if you are in a disempowered, like learned helplessness, what you are talking about, where, okay, you see an old man and you naturally assume that this person is weak and he doesn't have enough strength and he needs a lot of help, and you make them weak in that culture. Yes. Whereas I have seen certain other cultures where older people, they are so wise and so strong and they're doing everything themselves. And it's such an inspiration to see that, because in their culture, they don't weaken the concept of people, or around certain people, you change yourself and things like that.
You have to keep the subcultural wellness has to be kept secretly.
Wow.
When you're living in that, and it has to be a secret thing on you because you can't fight it. But I'll give you an example that reminded me of what you said about how you had to deal with cultures. You thought you were beautiful and then said you weren't beautiful. Well, I remember when I was growing up, my father was from Spain, so I'm Spanish. And I was living in New York in an Irish-German neighborhood for a lot of blue eyes and blonde. And my mother was always very empowered. So I went home one day and I said to my mother, I think I want to dye my hair blonde, so I could have. And she said, if you want to look like a clown, do it. It's okay. And that was it. That's all I needed. I stopped.
That was such a lovely example that you gave, because in some countries where I went, I see that the women, actually in these Latin American countries, especially in Venezuela, some in Costa Rica also, they will always dye their hair blonde and they will try to imitate the fashion of the Americans, like of US people, and they will try to walk like that, and it doesn't suit them. Like when I see them, I think they are so beautiful with their brown hair and they naturally have such beautiful features. But the moment they dye their hair, make it blonde and all, they look, first of all, so much older, and they don't look native in their own bodies. It looks like such a mismatch with their skin color and that hair.
Yeah. She said, you want to look like a clown? Go ahead. Look, I'll give you an example.
Exactly, they look like clowns.
Deepak Chopra. Deepak Chopra is a good friend. He's wonderful. He said that when he came, he's an endocrinologist, and he was a head resident at university in hospital in Massachusetts. And he said, I was there and I was an overweight smoking Indian person. I wasn't going to get anywhere. So what I did is I went back to India and I talked to Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, and he taught me Ayurvedic medicine, and I brought Ayurvedic medicine. I lost weight. I stopped smoking, and I brought mind-body medicine to the United States. So Deepak Chopra now is a name that is wonderful. Before, I said, oh, this Indian, this overweight Indian who smokes. So what you do is you always have to go to your roots and enhance your roots and be proud of your roots, but not the cultural disempowerment of your roots. That's the difference.
Very good. That discernment has to be there, and I think not everyone is equipped to do that in their minds.
Yes.
So I think that's why your course, like what you teach, is so helpful, because these are tools. Like you have a tool bag, like you carry a makeup kit, you have a tool bag where you keep these tools. Like, okay, now I'm going into this culture. So I know that people have this mindset. Yes. So, I cannot express this part of me to them, because then they can hurt me. And when I'm away from that culture, then I can express this part, because this other culture will not judge this aspect of me. So having that awareness, like you said, awareness is the main thing. I think that is very important. And that is something which can be learned.
And especially with my mother, was so empowering. She taught me how to fight cultural prejudice. So when I went to school at the University of Madrid and Vanderbilt, but I went to Madrid for quite a while. And while I was there, I was modeling for some really good companies, good modeling agencies. So I went back to Miami for the summer, and I went to this small modeling agency, and I said, "Look, here's my portfolio. I've done this." And said, "No, it's okay, but you look too Hispanic." And I said,
"You're like, I am Hispanic."
And I said, "Well, that's what I am." And I said, "You're going to find out that Hispanics are going to be really, really important." That's what I said. Instead of, "Oh, I'm something wrong with me." No. And look what happened. Now, if you're Hispanic, it's a, but my mother taught me that. Otherwise, I would have learned helplessness. I mean, I knew that I could do work in Europe, but here in the United States, it's a cultural admonition, and if you buy it, you have immunological responses to that.
Exactly, and then you start perceiving all these prejudices,
Yeah.
And then your life goes down the spiral.
That's right.
Wow,
Well, this has been wonderful. Thank you so much for the time that we spent together, and you have really embodied the things that I talk about. You do them very well, and you have become a thought leader by breaking away from the limitations that were placed for you. So the way I look at it to finish is that fate is what handed down to you. Agency is the ability that you have to make changes. So agency can shape fate into destiny. And that's very empowering.
Wow, that's lovely. Yes, when you talk about fate, it has a negative connotation, like something we can't control. But when you talk about destiny, it sounds like, wow, something magical,
It's
I want
open,
to go there. I want to find my destiny.
Yes.
So that is the difference.
That's right. You get a rainy, cold, wet day, and that's fate. And you say, okay, what a depressing day. Or agency, what a mystical day, so I can write some poems.
Amazing. Again, it's your perception, right?
Yeah.
And that perception is programmed by your belief systems, which comes from your culture all that, and if you don't let culture define you, rather you create your own culture, which you're calling the subculture, then you are not controlled by the mass mind, basically mass consciousness, right?
Beautifully put.
And that's when I think you can master your physical body, and you can stay away from diseases and all those things.
Yes.
Amazing. I love your work, and I love the way you put things into perspective, and you have all these experiences, and you know how to use the right words and the right examples to explain people these things in such layman's terms, although you have done all the technical work and all the research and everything. It's amazing. And I think people can learn a lot from you.
Well,
So I know that you do some courses on this. So I want to know, like, where can people find out more about your work? Like, tell us about your latest project, your latest book, course, social media handles, something that people can look you up after this video to learn more about your work.
yes. Well, thank you. Well, my books, by the Mind Body Self and the Mind Body Code, you can find them on Amazon, and people can go to my website biocognitive.com, and there's all kinds of information there. And then on YouTube, I have over 200 videos that are free, of course. And it's the YouTube channel is Dr. Mario Martinez. You go there and they're there. And there's also on TikTok, I have the handle is hashtag house shrink.
House shrink, nice.
And I have a
nice.
great following there. So there's quite a bit of information. And then I'm going to be doing, as you know, this course with Shift Network that we'll talk more about later. So there's a lot of good information there. And then I do, if you go to my website, you'll see that I do a monthly webinar called Healing the Wounded Hero, which is a great way to really learn and grow.
So just briefly, so people can know more about it, what is the Wounded Hero?
The Wounded Hero is a journey. It's a contemplative journey that rather than victims, we're not victims. We're heroes on a journey, and we're hurt, we're wounded with archetypal wounds like abandonment and betrayal and shame. But the wounded hero needs information to heal, but not as a victim, but as a hero. And then each month we have a little bit of information, what to do to heal the hero. So it's a hero's journey.
Oh, very nice, very nice. Yeah, you talked about those wounds. I have heard in your work, you talk about the archetypal wounds, right?
Yes.
So those are the wounds, right? Shame and betrayal and abandonment.
And abandonment.
Those are the main.
And each of them have psychoneuroimmunological reactions that I talk about in my book. In the Mind Body Code, I explain about them and each of them also has an antidote. The antidote for shame is honor, for abandonment is commitment, and for betrayal is loyalty.
That is loyalty to yourself.
To yourself.
Right? Because if someone betrays you, you don't want to be loyal to them.
No. Loyal to yourself, because what they disempowered you in loyalty. So you have to get it back. They disempowered you in shame, so you have to get your honor back. And they abandoned you, so you have to get your commitment back to yourself.
Right. And when you create that commitment to yourself, then I think you can stop your external manifestation of people shaming you.
Yes.
Right?
Very much.
If I become loyal to myself, then I will attract less people who will betray me.
You'll attract people that speak loyalty fluently.
Right.
If you're into betrayal, you'll attract people that speak betrayal fluently, not because of the law of attraction, but because of selective perception.
Selective perception. Very good. I just love it. And I want to tell all the people who are here to check out Dr. Mario Martinez's work, to get his books, The Mind Body Code and The Mind Body Self. They are very, very powerful books. And if you have any area in your life that is holding you back, do get his books and learn how to work that internally so you can change your exterior reality in alignment with your desires. So he is also offering a 7-week course. You said it will start in March, right?
Yes.
With Shift Network. And it is about longevity and anti-aging. Is that
yes? And about reversing aging without medication. But I also want to congratulate you for the wonderful work that you do yourself, Baisa.
Thank you very much. And I want to end today's session with a beautiful quote by you, Dr. Martinez. And it says, gratitude is more than a habit or practice. It is a consciousness. Embody it and live out pristine gratefulness. Celebrate life.
Thank you so
that's
much.
A beautiful way to end today's session. Thank you so much for being here with us today, and have a great day, and namaste.
Namaste. My pleasure.